A horrifying incident occurred in Mexico in July 2011, when a video showing two men being dismembered by cartel members with a chainsaw was shown in public. The severe brutality used by these criminal organizations, which might involve vicious beatings, burning, and other horrifying acts, was highlighted by this incident. El Guiso, the stew. One of Mexico's most wanted criminals, Santiago Mesa Lopez, also known as El Poo, or the Poolmaker, was apprehended by the Mexican army in the Baja Seasons neighborhood of Tijuana. He was known for being a special cleanup agent for cartels, and is thought to have stirred and dissolved over 300 bodies in acid at his Enada ranch, which is located about 70 miles south of the border. He became well known for being one of the pioneers of the Elgo method. Elgo, which translates to the soup, is essentially putting a person inside a big oil drum, filling it with acid or gasoline, and then setting it on fire to create a furnace that burns victims. The creator of this technique, which is most usually used to make stew or guiso, is unknown. However, some Mexican cartel cells have gained notoriety for preparing this lethal mixture. Employing this preferred method of execution, fill a large barrel with water, then add pure sulfuric acid, which causes the barrel to boil and spit forth a dangerously hot liquid. When it's ready, victims will be submerged in it while still breathing. This cruel kind of torture will cause them to suffer greatly and eventually die slowly. Born in Caloa, Mexico, in mid-April 1964 to impoverished parents from an early age, aged 13, Santiago Mesa Lopez battled poverty. He worked in construction until the 1990s, when he relocated to Danana in pursuit of a better life, until his sister was raped by members of a criminal organization seeking retribution. Through his childhood friend Elo, Lopez joined the Danana cartel. As Santiago progressed through the ranks, the boss, FRP, noticed his efforts a few years later. One fateful day, Perez gave him the grim task of disposing of bodies, offering him a weekly payment of $600. That's when it all started. He would liquefy his victims in a very efficient and distinctive manner. He would stir the corpses as he dipped them in a tub of sodium hydroxide and acid. Santiago would eventually throw the body into a wasteland, burn him with gasoline a second time, and bury him there. You would keep this mixture on high heat for at least 8 hours until the body finally disintegrates, because some parts of it, like teeth or nails, might not dissolve. He allegedly stuffed more than 300 victims inside barrels of lye and dumped some of the liquefied remains in a pit on a hillside compound in eastern Danana, according to investigators. Following his arrest, detectives discovered over 14,000 remains interred at his ranch. Given that the torture technique revolves around roasting victims, the moniker for this incredibly brutal mode of execution starts to make sense. According to reports, during his interrogation, Santiago stated that he had attempted, but failed, to flee from his old boss, Arellano Felix Perez, a former member of the Arellano Felix or Tijuana cartel. When senior members of the Arellano Felix cartel asked Lopez to conduct an experiment with water and acid in a barrel while he was working on a farm in 1996, Lopez claimed he had no choice but to be recruited because they threatened to use violence to carry out these acts. Nobody knows if that is real or not, but the fact that he continued doing this for many years before being caught is still accurate. Many Danana families were incensed when he was first jailed in 2012 for a mere 10 years, with the possibility of parole in April 2022. However, on February 5, 2024, his prison term was extended by an extra 30 years. High-ranking cartel bosses began using the Elgo method to murder their rivals and traitors because of its unparalleled grisly efficiency. Conscious of the cold, they are confined by their hands and feet to make it easier for them to fit in an oil barrel. This method's legacy serves as a sobering reminder of organized crime's brutality. Food for the pets.
They often torture and kill their victims. They have fed some of their victims, dead and alive, to tigers belonging to the Chapitos.
Since the 1980s, rare, dangerous, and exotic animals have been used to show off insanely high wealth, but cartel bosses have adopted another insane tradition. Just like Pablo kept hippopotamuses and other exotic creatures at his private compound, high-ranking Mexican cartel members still imitate the infamous Colombian drug lords of the 1980s and 1990s. It was a way to show off and send threats, as it seemed like the more dangerous a cartel was, the more dangerous pets had to be found in their homes. Mexican authorities later revealed that these animals weren't just for show. Sometimes cartels would throw their unfortunate victims in enclosed areas with starving apex predators in the most wicked way, making them beg for their lives with fear. At 17, he joined the elite special forces to fight guerrillas and drug traffickers. After 7 years in the army, he deserted on March 27, 1998, to join Los Zetas with Oel Cardin and Arturo Guzman Desna. According to officials, Edie Berto, aka Z3 in Alaska, was one of the most wanted Mexican drug lords and a maestro of torture. He was known for using la paleta, which involved stripping a victim naked and brutally beating him with a board. Reports also say Lascano tied a man to a tree and beat him until he broke his legs, then left him there for 3 days until he died. Lascano was infamous for feeding his victims to lions and tigers on his property. He didn't starve these creatures, but he kept them hungry for his next prey. He relished watching his dogs torture his victims and laughing at their suffering. He forced them into a cage and allowed an audience to watch. He was shot and killed by Mexican military officials in 2012. Flaying. Summer 2018 that shook Mexico posted a disturbing video from La Union's hills near Costa Grande and Tierra Caliente. It included a brutal Mexican cartel murder of a father and son. 2 men kneeled with their mouths gagged and hands tied. The captors questioned the older man and fed him with a large wooden stick. The violence was unimaginably horrific, and just when you thought it couldn't get worse, the father was beheaded in front of his son with a pen-sized knife. The most heartbreaking scene in this video was the son's reaction. His tears moved the nation, and the fact that the father did not fight his captors was surprising. It appeared as though he had accepted his fate, possibly due to trauma from previous beatings or being paralyzed by the situation. After they took out the father, the son had to endure a much longer and more agonizing ordeal. The son remained conscious, floating in and out of shock while his captors stabbed his chest. The video reveals how far these cartels would go to run their operations successfully. In 2010, Guzman or El Chapo made headlines after he recorded himself using flame torture on a rival cartel member, Hugo Hernandez, with a chainsaw flayed Hernandez, and then ordered his soldiers to stitch the cut skin on a ball as a warning to the war's cartel. Hernandez's body was found in a plastic container, and his remains were put on Las Mocas streets to scare El Chapo's rivals. They methodically stripped their victims' flesh with special knives or used other sharp instruments to pull their faces off while screaming. The cartels have perfected this brutal procedure, keeping victims alive for protracted torture reserved for the worst offenders, including rival cartel members, double agents, and thieves. How you can inflict such horrific anguish while these individuals cry for their lives is way beyond us. Dermatologists say shock, hypothermia, and infections are the main reasons for flaying deaths. Death is estimated to occur a few hours to a few days after the burn. If this isn't harsh, we don't know what is. Dismemberment. Marciano Chana Man Vasquez was arrested in 2015 by Texas police. He was suspected of being a hitman for the El Zetas cartel and was involved in the kidnapping of a former drug dealer in 2013. The former drug dealer was testifying against Vasquez, saying that the cartel assassin took him to an unknown location where Vasquez was hiding his 3 children. When the hitman took off his blindfold, the drug dealer saw a couple and their daughter standing next to a barrel on fire. He said that Vasquez and the other people there made the parents watch as Vasquez hacked their daughter with an axe. It's not just Vasquez, a lot of people in the cartel kill their victims by injecting them with morphine, adrenaline, or heroin. This affects the victim's central nervous system and keeps them awake during the process. Heavy, sharp blades and sometimes even K-knives are then used to cut off all of the victim's limbs. During the torture, these members would avoid cutting close to vital organs so that the victims would be in unbearable pain for a longer time. The most effective method to prepare individuals for the pearly gates involves causing them to lose blood, contract infections, and experience extreme pain. People like these have no choice but to give up the information they're holding back, or they would likely die from the pain. To achieve a dual goal, the perpetrators torture and slowly kill the victim, thereby simplifying the disposal of the body. In some cases, body parts are left in public places to send a message to people who go against the cartel that put them there. October 2010, according to Israel Recon, a member of the gang was killed and then cut up for killing the son of one of El Chapo's allies. When El Chapo caught him, he beat him until he passed out, but he had a doctor ready in case he lost consciousness too soon. El Chapo told his men to beat him up in horrible ways that ended with his limbs being cut off. His body parts were then dumped in the Mexican city of Cancun. On their shelf of torture, dismemberment is the cruel method that shows how cruel these gangs really are. Beheading by chainsaw. Felix Garcia and his uncle Barnabas Castro were brutally decapitated in 2011. This was one of the first executions by the cartel that was posted online. It shows a man wearing a ski mask with a chainsaw, positioning the moving blade against his neck. You can already imagine what will happen next. These men, who were part of the infamous Quiloa cartel, made the grave mistake of robbing drug lords, and as a result, they paid the ultimate price with their lives. However, this is not the only graphic story we can think of. In August 2008, infamous cartel boss Moses E. Samiame was arrested shortly after he was accused of decapitating 12 people in Yucatan, Mexico. These are just a few examples, and everyone in and around Mexico knows that joining these cartels is equivalent to accepting a death sentence. In our digital age, we have them videotaping their murders and carrying out these beatings like Iraqi insurgents sending out messages to rival gangs or the government. How many movies do you need to see that celebrate these tales? As violence increased in the area, scores of schools went on strike over security concerns after Mexican authorities discovered 5 decomposing heads in a sack outside an Acapulco primary school in September 2011. 11 years later, 5 more severed heads were discovered in an ice refrigerator in Tamaulipas on the opposite side of the nation. These strategies have been used for years throughout Mexico and aren't specific to any one cartel or area. They would not only chop off the heads of rival cartel members but also assault Mexican journalists who have voiced disapproval of their actions, sending a strong message to anyone else who dared to criticize them. This practice has a twist in that these beheadings are occasionally ritually carried out to satisfy religious or spiritual requirements and are entwined with the group's belief system. Cannibalism. CJ and led by Cantes or El Meno have made news for cannibalism in the narco world. The CJ is one of the most powerful cartels in the country, operating in at least 35 states across Mexico and Puerto Rico. To ensure that their recruits can handle the increasing levels of violence, they must suppress their empathy for those they kill or torture and forget that they are human beings. Cannibalism was used. These shock public demonstrations of hostility are meant to intimidate other groups and assert supremacy, along with exhibiting new weaponry and military technologies. They learn how to cut fingers and toes, the cartel's favorite torture method for rival groups. Recruits must consume their fingers during training, then move on to larger body parts. If anyone vomited, instructors would fetch the agitated body parts from the ground and order them to eat them again. These recruits also had to sleep next to corpses at night to desensitize them to death. Experts believe that this vicious initiation ritual instilled a warped sense of loyalty to the cartel by dismantling their sense of self-identity. Miguel Trino Morales, known as Z40, the former Zetas leader, had a notorious habit of eating his victims' hearts. He used this as a spiritual right to obtain invincibility against his adversaries and police, and to warn rival cartel members. A former hitman said Miguel would consume these body parts and force other victims to do similarly. Psychological warfare. Contrary to widespread belief, cartels know that individuals would say anything to ease their suffering, so they terrify others so they can't be opposed. Cartels could use their insane psychological torture by keeping victims in small rooms with limited food and water, making them live in fear, then using prolonged isolation with terrifying sounds and images and mock executions to break them down physically and emotionally for the smallest reasons. Some victims would lose a finger and end up with no fingers. They'd be scared, and worse always comes. Sometimes they would slowly dismember their bodies or use any brutal torture tactic they could think of, giving them intimidation power that they needed to stay on top. The dangerous thing about Mexican cartels is that they intimidate the public and their rivals and sometimes target innocent individuals like former IO Mayor Maria Santos Gareda Salazar. In November 2012, the Nines Templar cartel kidnapped Maria and made her watch as her husband was burned alive with a blowtorch and dis. She then saw him kill 4 more victims with the same method, and then they sexually assaulted her before killing her. Her autopsy revealed a traumatic head injury. The Mexican cartel uses extreme violence and psychological manipulation to control their victims, using brutal murders as a warning. Tehuacanazo. On February 12, 2019, during the heavily publicized trial of El Chapo, A lot of Kaloa torture methods were made public, and one of them that stood out was waterboarding, which is an insane method of punishment also known as tehuacanazo in Spanish. It involves pouring water on a cloth and placing it over the face of the individual being punished and restricting them from breathing. Waterboarding has been utilized for ages, and Dutch traders used it against the British during the Spanish Inquisition in the 16th century. In the 17th century, the Japanese army during World War II, and the Red Rouge in Cambodia back in the 70s. But despite how many times it's been used in the past, cartels today have added this lethal Mexican twist to it. This torture technique forces the agony of drowning on its victims while also causing severe pain, lung and brain damage, oxygen deprivation, and of course, psychological distress. Mexican cartels are infamous for carrying out cruel and violent killings on those who stand in their way, and this fierce twist is causing the victim to experience the terrifying sensation of drowning. The tehuacanazo is like waterboarding, but instead of using regular water, the cartel uses carbonated water. In their instance, they force the water into the victim's nostrils, and in more severe situations, the carbonated water is spiked with chili pepper. The wet towel makes it 1,000 times worse because it covers your face and makes you afraid of drowning the heavier the fabric feels on your face. To prolong death and maximize torture, cartels pour water intermittently for as long as possible. If the liquid is poured continuously, it can lead to death. In other words, it is uncontrolled torture. Hanging. In 2016, Mexican authorities discovered a body hanging from a bridge in Tijuana, just 10 meters south of the U.S. border. The San Diego Union Tribune reported that from January to October 2018, the drug trade claimed the lives of more than 25 people in Tijuana, demonstrating how common this insane occurrence has become in the region. In November 2021, police pulled 9 bodies from a bridge in Zacatecas as a warning between rival cartels. This was in retaliation for the mutilation of 14 men, most likely from Los Zetas, who were discovered in a minivan in Nuevo Laredo. The bodies were set up around 6 a.m. and were hanging for about 4 hours before the cops arrived and pulled them down. Hanging people in public sends a message over the turf in disputed areas. These victims are mutilated, mistreated, and simply hanged with signs for all to see. This medieval savagery is not limited to cartels. It dates back around 500 years to Europe and is utilized by the Taliban as well. For Mexican cartels, hanging a rival poster in highly visible places sends a message about turf in disputed cities. These victims are frequently mutilated and show signs of abuse. But to the cartels, the more victims they can put up, the more powerful they appear to be. Many of these victims are recovered bodies of rival members who were involved in a shootout or victims who were kidnapped. This execution approach exemplifies why the majority of these executions occur, to show who is in charge in the area. The cartel kitchens. Mexican government estimates show that at least 60,000 people have disappeared since 2006. However, a 2015 analysis identified only 6 federal court convictions for the crime of forced disappearance. The core cause of the majority of these disappearances. Cartel kitchens. These infamous cartels Mexican restaurants play an important and horrific role in their murderous street campaign. If you enter inside, you will witness bloody handprints on the walls, dirty garments, plastic cable ties, machetes and pen, as one observer noted. The crunch of bones beneath a thick blanket of ash. This was the scene at La Gaya Ranch in northern Veracruz, which is operated by the Los Zetas cartel. After that cartel took over the ranch in 2011, it was used to incinerate their victims. The idea was very simple. They would stalk a target for a while, and instead of killing them and leaving the body lying cold-blooded on the street, they would abduct that target and take them to any of their 12 kitchen locations, where they would torture and extract valuable information. Before killing and preparing the remains, it is estimated that over 60,000 people were victims of cartel kitchens in Mexico. These disappearances have been carried out by numerous crime groups all around with objectives including kidnapping for sex slavery, organ harvesting, forced labor ransoms, and even repression of political activists and journalists. Mexican authorities sifted through human bones, teeth, nails, and more to identify torture victims in these kitchens. Anyone finding themselves in one of these kitchens experiences an immense form of psychological torture. At first you see gruesome sights, and the sounds of other victims screaming in pain, which is enough to break even the strongest of hearts before the actual torture begins. Families are upset and frustrated that this kitchen at the ranch is not a recent discovery. Since 2017, they forced authorities to search that property more than 4 times, and each time they've done so. The brutality exhibited by these cartels serves as a stark reminder of the dark side of humanity. As we continue to explore this world, we must maintain our vigilance and hold out hope for a future free from violence. Please like, share, and subscribe for more content like this.